Welcome to the CSBP Fertilisers Grow Better podcast, sharing knowledge with growers on leading crop nutrition, sustainable agriculture and other issues impacting the agricultural industry.
G'day everyone and welcome to the CSBP Grow Better podcast. My name's Gray Johnston and I'm joined today by CSBP Senior Agronomist Luke Dawson. Luke, welcome to the show.
G'day Gray, how you going?
Very well, thank you. Hope all's well in your world. Luke, today we're going to talk about new logic grain and soil analysis and opportunities for growers to use those tools to improve the productivity and profitability of their enterprises. But I guess first, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background and your career at CSBP and what you're up to at the moment?
Yep, so obviously named Luke Dawson, currently one of the senior agronomists at CSBP. I've been with CSBP for about 17 and a half years, roughly. Started mid-2005, came out of Muresk, so Bachelor of Agribusiness Marketing at the Muresk Institute in Northam when it was still open in Northam, and came in as a trainee area manager to CSBP and have never left. So variety of different roles over the last 17 years. Obviously, trainee area manager around the state, Hyden, Esperance, Dalwallinu, and then had a stint as a district manager for the Central Midlands before I started as a senior agronomist, which I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. Originally from the far eastern wheat belt, so a place called Warralacken, which is about 40 k's east of Muckenbuden, fairly marginal country. Grew up on the farm there, and then went to Muresk and have been with CSBP for my whole career, basically.
We know harvest's underway for many areas of the state, and one of the services that CSBP and the CSBP lab can offer is grain analysis. Can you touch on what some of the benefits of that process might be, and how people would go about doing that analysis? So
grain analysis is probably a fairly underutilised service that we offer as a part of our New Logic and CSBP Soil and Plant Lab service. So basically, it's a way of identifying any nutritional deficiencies that may have been missed earlier in the season, not picked up through soil sampling or not picked up through plant sampling. So it's basically a way of determining or identifying an issue within the paddock and establishing whether or not that loss of production or something like that is actually caused by a nutritional deficiency. So as the name implies, we analyse the grain. So we do need actual ripened grain, and generally we do focus on your cereal crops, so your wheat and barley. But it can be a fairly powerful tool if it's used correctly and if the samples are taken correctly. Much like soil and plant sampling, there's certain nutrients that you'll get more benefit out of doing grain sampling for. So in terms of grain sampling, the two major nutrients that we kind of focus on are nitrogen and copper. However, it does give us a fairly good indication of sulfur, zinc, manganese, nitrogen and copper levels in the crop or in the grain. Potassium and phosphorus are not very well correlated, compared to soil or plant testing. So we do get an indication of the levels in terms of phosphorus in the seed, but it's not super accurate. And potassium is more of a, we tend to focus more on soil sampling or plant analysis to determine our K uptake. It's just not a very good correlation in the grain samples. But basically, it's a fairly easy process, Gray, to get the samples into the lab. What we do recommend is sending or sampling whole heads. So basically, get a New Logic plant analysis kit and get about 50 heads, whole heads, whack them in the bag. Using your Decipher Ag mobile app, much the same as plant sampling, we take a GPS coordinate of where in the paddock the samples have been taken, whack them in the kit and send it through the lab. Now, what we do recommend is much the same as plant sampling, is taking 2 samples from sort of the affected area or the area of lower production and 2 samples from different parts of the paddock where the production hasn't been limited, so that we can get a good comparison. Now, often the question is asked, can I just go and dip a cup or a bucket into the grain tank and send that through? The answer is not recommended, because we don't know, particularly with the newer combines, we don't know where in the paddock that grain has come from. And the newer combines as well do tend to throw out smaller shriveled grain or lighter grain or something like that. They have a tendency to do that. So we're not getting the most representative sample if we go out of the grain tank. So like I said, we recommend whole heads. You will need, when you submit it on the app, we do need to put a note on the app that you would like the samples to be threshed. Once they get submitted, once they get accepted at the lab and booked in, the lab staff will actually thresh that at the lab, and then they'll sample the grain arising from that. So what I would recommend is if you are wanting to do any grain samples for this year, during harvest, is to contact your local CSBP account manager to have a chat about it, because it's a fairly easy process, and we can help you with that. And
you talked about areas of lower production there. I guess is that the main reason people would be trying to do grain analysis, trying to identify some issues?
Yeah, generally it'll come through on the yield monitor, or it may the grower may be on the header, and it looks good, but then the grain's not actually coming through as it should be, or it's just, there's some discoloration in the stubble or something like that, which may indicate, a copper deficiency, or, the crop might be really bulky, but, we're not getting the protein, or the protein's too high, or the yield's not there. So it's just something that recommend, if you do see something like that, there's an easy way to identify whether or not it's a nutritional issue, and by grain sampling we can actually identify that, and then we can go back and do some more discovery on that, and to target some soil sampling, target some plant sampling. We can help us tailor our fertilizer program for next year using the results if the samples have been done representatively.
So that's a nice lead in then to the balance of our conversation, which is soil sampling season, as crazy as it may seem, is almost on us. And once harvest is complete, there'll be plenty of opportunities for growers to work with their CSBP account managers to start planning their soil sampling program. Do you want to talk about what are the opportunities there, and what some of the benefits can be from soil sampling, and how do we recommend growers go about it?
Like you said, we're getting to the pointy end of the season now, where headers are getting into the paddocks, or they're getting ready to get into the paddocks. But we do need to start thinking about next year, and the first thing that we need to do before making any decisions going into the next season is to actually soil sample. In particular, it's no secret that we're in a very high priced input environment, not only from a fertilizer point of view, but everything is really high at the moment. So I think the importance of soil sampling going into a season like 2023 is actually even more important than previous years. The way I look at soil sampling, Grays, is the soil is your biggest asset as a grower. It's your biggest asset. Soil sampling should not be ever viewed as a cost. It's an investment. It's an investment in the biggest asset that you own, and it's basically doing due diligence on a fertilizer program, which in some cases may have doubled since last year or in previous years. So we need to make sure that we're spending the money in the right place, and soil sampling is the best way to start that process off. So what I would recommend is obviously coming up with a fairly comprehensive soil sampling program for next year, potentially increasing or targeting, being more targeted with our soil sampling. And thinking about, CSBP, we've got our 30-33 rule, which is sample every 30 hectares to 30 centimetres every 3 years. So I can't impress enough on the importance of actually going to depth, and not going to depth just for pH or for potassium, but getting the full suite of nutrients to that 30 centimetres. So we know exactly where in the soil profile the nutrients are, what are our nutrient levels for a start, where they are in the profile, and then what our likely yield potential or production targets are going to be, and really fine tune our fertilizer program going into next year. But because the cost is high, but the risk of getting it wrong is much higher, and that comes from both points of view of under fertilizing. So we don't want to reduce production, but also over fertilizing. We want to make sure that we're putting the nutrients where they're needed, no more, no less. I've always got a bit of a saying that the most expensive nutrient that you buy is the nutrient that you don't need. So it doesn't really matter what the price is. If you don't need that nutrient, then don't apply it, and vice versa. If you need a nutrient, for example, potassium, increased potassium rates or something like that, then going and spending a heap of money on nitrogen is it's not a good investment. We need to target exactly where we need to spend our money, and get it right. And the best way, or the only way to do that at the start of the season, is by soil sampling, and comprehensively soil sampling.
So you've made a compelling case for soil sampling there. If growers are uncertain about how to proceed there, what should they do?
First point of call would be to contact your CSBP account manager and sit down and actually come up, with a plan for next year. Looking at your cropping program and saying, rightio, what paddocks do I want to target? Am I going to do paddock by paddock, or are we going to look at blocks? Or coming up with a really good plan, a really tight plan, and saying, rightio, this is what we need to do. Potentially apportioning a little bit more money out of the budget into the soil sampling program, because like I said, it's a really good investment. It's a lower percentage of your fertiliser bill in a higher priced environment. Generally, we work on it, being around 1 to 2% of your total fertiliser bill. In a high price environment like this, you actually get more value out of that as a percentage of your total fertiliser spend. Getting it planned early, so that we can get the sampling jobs logged and into the lab, and then we can make those decisions before, well before next season starts.
We'd recommend Decipher Ag to do your soil test program.
Absolutely, yep. So if we're going back to existing sites, and obviously using just Decipher Ag to select those sites, it's a very, very simple process that our account managers are all across. But also selecting new sites. Absolutely, we need to have a GPS coordinate for those sites so that we can actually start to build up data for each site, and follow any trends. And yeah, Decipher Ag is the best way to do that. It's a really simple process. We can enter all your paddock information and your rotational information, and feed that straight into the app, to go through to a soil testing contractor, and it just really streamlines the whole process and makes the job easy. So when harvest is finished and everyone wants to go to the beach for a few weeks, the soil samplers can be out there taking the samples, digging holes, and then when everyone gets back to work in February, as we generally do, we're all ready to go to run it through new logic and really fine tune those fertiliser programs for next season.
Can you give us any examples of issues you've seen managed through grain and soil analysis?
In my 17 plus years with CSBP, soil analysis it's the starting point. If we don't measure, we don't know. And if you're going to, spending a lot of money without doing like I said, that due diligence on it, we're flying blind. For me, that's the starting point. It's the most important aspect of growing a crop is working out what we're dealing with, what we've got, what our limitations are, and how do we address those limitations. And it doesn't even have to be a nutritional limitation. It can be something like a chemical limitation, like subsoil acidity or something like that. We can identify that with soil sampling. The more information we've got, the more accurate our decision is going to be. It's probably one of the most important parts of the cropping cycle, in my opinion.
And Luke, you've been heavily involved this year in the CSBP Detect Plus program and working to deliver that to a number of growers. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and those growers' experience with that program this year, and give a bit of background on what that program involves?
Yeah, so the Detect Plus program obviously integrates our CSBP Detect real-time nitrogen scanning service. So the Detect device gives us the ability to go into a paddock and scan the leaves of the growing crop at any point in the season and get a real-time nitrogen status update. which is fantastic. You know, we don't have to wait 5 to 10 days for postage and all that sort of stuff to get results. It can give us really timely decision making, you know, abilities, particularly around nitrogen. Now the Detect Plus program integrates that as it's a full cycle nutritional thing. So you know, the Detect scan is one piece of the puzzle, but it starts, like I said, with soil sampling. So the Detect Plus program, you know, we select soil sampling sites, we sample them to depth to 30 centimetres, comprehensive new logic sampling. From there, we determine what parts of the paddock we're going to go and do Detect scanning on in season. So we know what our limitations are. We can address our limitations at the start of the season via soil sampling, comprehensive soil sampling. Once the season starts and the crops emerge and up and away, we go and plant test those sites. So again, we're getting another layer of information, making sure that we're addressing all our limitations. You know, is there any trace element deficiencies? Are we low on K? So we want to eliminate all the variables and basically make nitrogen the only one we need to focus on going forward. So we've done our soil sampling, we've done our plant sampling, and then at 3 points during the season, we get our contractors to go in and do the Detect scanning. And that gives us a good gauge on the nitrogen status of the crop. But the beauty of the Detect Plus model is that we have a nitrogen recommendation model which is derived from new logic built into the program. It also takes account of the current rainfall. So we have patched rainfall data for each site. So we get three yield scenarios effectively. So we get, you know, rainfall to date. But we also get if we have a decile 2 finish, a decile 5 finish, or a decile 8 finish from that point in the season, these are our likely yield potentials. You know, we input stuff like water use efficiency, nitrogen use efficiency, you know, nitrogen status at the start of the season, and also nitrogen applied. So we know what we've already put on, and we know what the crop is likely going to do, you know, over three different rainfall scenarios. And then that helps us to give the grower some information to say, well, you know, if this happens, we've put on this much N, this is how much N we might need over these 3 scenarios. And the beauty of the Detect Plus program is we scan it every 2 weeks. So we can gauge what's going on. We can sort of say, well, look, at the moment, the crop's nitrogen sufficient. There's enough nitrogen there. We've put on enough for now. We can probably wait another 2 weeks before we need any more N, but we know that at the very minimum, with a decile 2 finish, we're going to need this much more N, with the potential to have this much more N. So it gives us a real benefit in planning and logistics for growers to apply nitrogen and how much they need. But like I said, we can run those reports weekly to see what is actually happening with the rainfall and what's happening with the yield potentials. And it gives us a really accurate nitrogen recommendation to be able to say, well, here we go, this is what I think you should be doing going forward. So that's been working really well, Gray. We had the pilot last year and we got a really good level of accuracy out of it. And we've had a fair few guys, particularly in the Esperance zone, which I've been looking after for the last year, have jumped on board and are seeing huge benefits to that service. And it's not just benefits in knowing how much nitrogen to put on, it's actually being able to pull back on nitrogen in certain paddocks. Some examples, we've got guys saying, I'm going to go out with 100 litres of Flex-CN for the next top up, and sort of looked at a few paddocks and said, well, you know, we've had legumes in the rotation in the last 2 years. The crop looks like it's got enough nitrogen at the moment. So let's wait another 2 weeks. We'll scan it again and we'll see what's going on. But at the moment, with the nitrogen in the plant currently and what's been applied, we probably don't need any more nitrogen on these paddocks. However, you know, a paddock that might be in a canola wheat rotation or hasn't had legumes for 2 years might need more than what they were planning to put on. So it's apportioning that nitrogen from that paddock to this paddock. So not buying any more nitrogen or applying any more nitrogen. It's just making sure that we're applying it at the right rate in the right place. Be as accurate as possible in terms of production and yield potential, but also hitting those quality targets as well. So it's been a real eye opener for me. It's been a fantastic service that CSBP has introduced, and it's actually really exciting to be able to stand in a paddock and say, well, I think you've got enough nitrogen at the moment. What? I don't think you've got enough nitrogen. I know you've got enough nitrogen because the device has actually told me. And so it's a really, from an agronomist point of view, it's a really exciting tool to have at our fingertips.
So then, if customers are interested in being part of that program next year, what should they do?
Have a chat with your local CSBP account manager. So it's a part of the service offering that CSBP offers. It's much the same as New Logic Soil, New Logic Plant, New Logic Grain Analysis. It's called Detect Plus, and it integrates, like I said, it integrates all of those services going forward. So one thing I did forget to mention is that at the end of the season, we actually go back and do some grain samples on those sites. So we close the loop. We do soil sampling, we do plant sampling, we do detect scanning, and we do grain sampling. And it helps us to firm up, that decision-making process. Did we make the right decision throughout the year? And how's that going to help us going forward for the next season? So it's basically the full service of everything that we can offer, and all the expertise that CSBP has in one package. It's fantastic.
It's great to hear your enthusiasm and passion for the topic, Luke. So thank you so much for joining us, and I'm sure you'll be keeping a close eye on harvest as it unfolds, and then on soil sampling as we get cracking in planning next year.
Absolutely, yeah. I look forward to seeing the harvest results as they come through, and I wish all of our growers around the state the best of luck over harvest, and hope it's a smooth one and a big one, and no adverse weather events from now until the end of January.
Good on you, Luke. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all out there for joining us on the CSBP Grow Better podcast. I've been Gray Johnston. As always, you can slide into our DMs with any feedback for the show, and remember to subscribe, rate, review, and follow us at CSBP Fertilisers on all your social platforms. Thanks all for joining us. Thank you, Luke. See you later. Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. For more information about CSBP, please visit csbp-fertilisers.com.au or connect with us on social media at CSBP Fertilisers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn.